Cassian Ward was the only black student in Harvard's elite math program. Until the day he solved an impossible equation no one else could touch. Instead of applause, they accused him of cheating. Within 24 hours his proof vanished, and a white professor claimed it as his own. But Cassian had one secret no one saw coming, one that could burn Harvard to the ground. And it started with a single line of chalk. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Cassian Ward walked like a shadow through Harvard Yard. His sneakers quiet on the cobblestones, still wet from the morning rain. Autumn leaves drifted from the canopy above like thoughts no one had spoken out loud. This wasn't the first time he'd felt invisible, but here, it was sharper, louder. Harvard didn't erase him. It just never noticed he'd arrived. At 17, Cassian wasn't just the youngest student in Harvard's elite mathematics program. He was also the only black freshman in the cohort, a prodigy from a forgotten zip code in Southside Chicago. His name had never been listed on private school rosters. His mother had never been in the PTA, and no alumni legacy paved his way here. What brought him to Cambridge was raw brilliance, and a guidance counselor who'd whispered, "Try, just one." But from orientation week, the tone was clear. During introductions, students shared names tied to Fortune 500 companies, Supreme Court justices, and Ivy League traditions. When Cassian said simply, "Cassian Ward, South Side," a silence followed like a dropped pin in a courtroom. Someone coughed. Another kid asked if that was a boarding school. He didn't correct them. He never did. In those first days, microaggressions wore designer coats. His roommate, Mason, seemed polite enough, until Cassian returned from the gym to hear him joking on a call. "Yeah, they gave me a black genius roommate. Must be a diversity quota thing." The door wasn't even fully closed. In classrooms, the eyes of professors often landed on him not with curiosity, but confusion, as if trying to reconcile the student on paper with the face in front of them. "You're in the advanced number theory seminar," one asked aloud, scanning his notes. "Impressive, background considered." The comment hovered in the air. Background. Cassian said nothing. Just like he said nothing when at a late-night dorm study session, a white girl asked, "Is it true math genius skips generations in black families?" Others laughed, not cruelly, but uncomfortably, as if unsure if it was racist or just quirky. He swallowed hard. Eyes on the problem set. He always kept his eyes on the problem set. In his silence, he listened. He took everything in, not just the coursework, but the culture of quiet exclusion. He heard students talk freely about legacy admissions and hedge fund internships, like birthrights. In one economics class, a heated debate flared about affirmative action. Mason was at the center of it.
"I just think we need to be honest."
Mason argued, hands in his hoodie pockets, voice casual. "Not everyone who gets in deserves to be here. If we're lowering the bar for some students to feel inclusive, we're compromising standards." Cassian was in the room. No one looked at him. No one had to. And yet he refused to slip into their expectations. In math he was alive. Numbers didn't care where you came from. Equations didn't measure skin tone. When he solved, he felt weightless, like walking on water. But he also knew that here, brilliance wasn't enough. Not when your skin alone turned your confidence into arrogance, your silence into suspicion. Still, he never challenged them openly. He had his mother's voice in his head. Calm, soft, always loving but direct. "Baby, they're gonna look at you and wait for you to fail. Don't give them that. Never let 'em see you bleed." So he didn't. Even as the pressure grew, even as a TA accidentally excluded him from group emails, even as professors mispronounced his name 3 weeks into class, he bore it all with that same stoic stillness. The kind his grandfather called plantation patience, the kind where you smile while building your escape. What no one knew was that Cassian was already seeing patterns in the lectures that other students couldn't. That he'd started working alone on advanced conjectures out of pure boredom. That in his notebook beside neat equations and proofs, he was mapping new territory in his mind, alone. Late nights were his peace. While his dormmates partied or debated politics in lounges decorated with antique Harvard banners, Cassian sat at the window of the common room, books open, equations lit by desk lamp glow. He didn't belong, not to them, but he wasn't trying to. He was building something else, something better. Until the morning everything shifted. It was early, the sun barely over the Charles River. Cassian opened his door to find a single envelope taped to it. No name. Just black block letters on plain white paper. At first he thought it was another flyer, some preppy frat initiation nonsense. Then he read it. You'll never solve what wasn't made for you. 7 words. No signature. No handwriting. Just an echo of every assumption he'd felt since he arrived. He stood frozen for a moment. The note in his hand, heart pounding with something deeper than fear. It wasn't just a threat. It was a philosophy. Someone, maybe many someones, didn't just dislike him. They believed deeply that he didn't belong in the temple of their genius. He didn't knock on any doors. Didn't ask who left it. He simply walked to the bathroom mirror and stared at his reflection. For the first time in weeks, he let himself feel what he'd held back. Not sadness, not anger, something sharper, something clearer. Determination. If Harvard's white walls weren't built for him, then he would build within them something they couldn't erase. But before he could leave for class that morning, another message arrived, this time not anonymous. An email. From Dr. Emil Hartwig, the tenured professor of advanced mathematical theory. The subject line, challenge of the semester. Cassian opened it. Inside were 5 dense equations followed by one line. Solve this in public. Next week. Lecture hall. Consider it your invitation. It was a math problem that Hartwig had become infamous for. A puzzle whispered about among upperclassmen. One that supposedly exposed the arrogant. Cassian stared at the problem, his hands still trembling from the note on his door. Something was happening, and it wasn't random. The same handwriting from the door note appeared again. This time scribbled at the bottom of the email as a signature, not typed, not digital. Just one sentence. Let's see how far you really think you'll get. The whisper spread faster than truth. By Monday morning, Hartwig's challenge had become gospel across campus. The lecture hall buzzed like an anthill kicked by curiosity. Students whispered the words like prophecy. The Hartwig conundrum. No one had ever solved it. Not doctoral candidates. Not visiting scholars. Not even Hartwig himself, or so he claimed. And now he'd issued it as a public challenge, with Cassian Ward squarely in the crosshairs. Cassian sat near the front, backpack still zipped, hands folded tightly in his lap. His expression didn't betray the storm inside him, but the tension in his shoulders gave him away. He wasn't nervous about the math. The math had never scared him. But he knew this wasn't about numbers. This was a test wrapped in humiliation, designed to turn him into spectacle. Around him, students chuckled and speculated. A white boy 2 rows back muttered, "Hartwig's finally gonna smoke that scholarship kid." Another replied, "Bet he regrets taking that seat from someone who actually earned it." Cassian didn't flinch. His eyes were on the chalkboard. The classroom door creaked open, and in walked Dr. Emil Hartwig, silver-haired, immaculately dressed, and grinning like a man who just lit a match in a room filled with gasoline. "Good morning," he said, brushing chalk dust from his blazer. "Let's begin." Without preamble, he walked to the board and began writing. Symbols, equations, complex logic functions, the kind of notation that made even upper-level students' eyes glaze. He filled the board with confidence, then paused and turned to the class. "This," he said, tapping the final line, "is the Hartwig conundrum. Unsimplified, unresolved, unbroken." Murmurs rippled. Hartwig's eyes landed on Cassian like a weight.
Mr. Ward, since you're one of our more mathematically ambitious students, why don't you walk us through your initial thoughts?
The silence was thick. All eyes turned. Cassian stared at the board, his expression unreadable. Slowly he stood, not out of obedience, but out of control. If he was going to be a target, he would choose the stance in which they aimed at him. He walked to the front, nodding briefly. Hartwig stepped back, hands behind his back, watching like a man who had just baited a trap. Cassian read the problem once, twice. By the third time, something familiar stirred, not recognition of the problem's origin, but of its arrogance. It was constructed not just to be difficult, but to overwhelm, to assert dominance. He reached for the chalk. But before his hand touched the board, Hartwig interrupted. "Careful," he said, voice soft but patronizing. "Once you write on my board, it's public record." Cassian froze. There it was. The trap wasn't the math. It was the performance. Solve it and you're a threat. Fail and you're exactly who they always said you were. He stepped back, chalk still in hand, and returned to his seat, without writing a single number. Not out of fear, but strategy. He needed time. He needed privacy. He needed air. Hartwick smiled like a man who had just won. The room exhaled, tension deflated into cruel smirks. For the rest of the lecture, Hartwick continued as if nothing had happened. Cassian didn't hear a word. His mind spun, dissecting each part of the problem, each implication. He wasn't afraid of the problem. He was afraid of what solving it would cause. Because brilliance from a black student didn't earn applause here. It earned suspicion. He remembered what his mother told him before he boarded the plane to Boston. They'll want your genius, baby, but they'll punish you for it. Walk slow. Watch close. He had walked slow. He had watched close. Now it was war. Group project invites stopped arriving. Study groups whispered when he passed. TE office hours suddenly filled 10 minutes after being posted. Even the cafeteria seemed colder. Eyes lingering. Jokes sharpening. But Cassian didn't bend. He didn't respond. He started keeping his own hours, slipping into lesser-used buildings, working under dim lights with headphones in. He rebuilt the conundrum from scratch in his notebook, every line of it, not just solving, but deconstructing its foundation. What he found disturbed him. The problem wasn't unsolvable. It was built to intimidate, to gatekeep, to humiliate. Its difficulty wasn't in the math itself. It was in the way Hartwick had woven it with misleading steps and irrelevant layers to confuse and shame. Cassian began to unravel it, like a thread pulled from a frayed collar. And beneath it he found something else. Patterns Hartwick didn't seem to notice. Shortcuts embedded in the equations. Elegant sequences that suggested the problem had once been something else. Something pure. It felt almost like someone else had built it before Hartwick ever claimed it. The deeper he dug, the less he believed Hartwick had authored it alone. And that was the first twist. One night in the quiet of the mathematics library, Cassian discovered a bound thesis from 1997 by a grad student named Alton Keyes. The handwriting, notation style, and logic mirrored Hartwick's conundrum, almost exactly, except it was more complete, more elegant, and the original author was black. Cassian read the footnotes twice. Hartwick's name was never mentioned, but the work was unmistakable. He ran his fingers along the spine of the thesis. Dusty. Untouched. It had been buried. Cassian scanned the thesis, page by page, into his phone and walked back to his dorm with a new fire in his chest. This wasn't just about math anymore. It was about theft, erasure, history repeating. The next morning in class, Hartwick lectured on mathematical originality. Smug, confident. Cassian didn't speak, but he made eye contact. Just long enough for Hartwick to notice the defiance behind his silence. That night, Cassian's dorm door was marked again. This time not with paper, but with chalk. A simple line across it, and beneath it, 3 words. Watch your step. He stared at the message. His breath caught. This wasn't just racism now. It was sabotage. A war was being waged, not just in the open, but in the shadows. Whispers, warnings, walls closing in. Cassian didn't sleep that night. Instead, he studied. He traced every variation of the conundrum against the Keyes thesis. He began writing his own proof. Detailed, airtight, undeniable. He planned to present it not in class, not to Hartwick, but publicly, online, through a journal that bypassed university gatekeeping. But first he had to finish. He spent 3 nights crafting the final step, coding the algebraic translation to prove general applicability. And then on the 4th morning, he woke to find his laptop screen black. Not off, not asleep, wiped. He tried rebooting. Nothing. Panicked, he pulled out his notebook. But the last half of the proof, the part he hadn't yet backed up, was gone. Vanished. All of it. As he sat stunned, a message pinged on his phone from a restricted number. One line. Even math has owners. Stay in your lane. The problem took up the entire whiteboard. It was a sea of symbols. Integrals, irrational roots, recursive functions, and abstract number theory stacked on top of itself like a fortress. Dr. Hartwick moved with surgical calm, writing without pause, his back to the room, as though unveiling scripture. By the time he stopped, the air itself seemed thinner. Cassian stared at it, not with panic but precision. Around him, the room had gone quiet. Even the self-assured legacy students sat wide-eyed. One muttered, "What the hell is that?" Another laughed nervously. "Looks like he just wrote hieroglyphics." But Hartwick wasn't joking. He capped the marker, stepped back slowly, and turned to face the room. "This," he said, "is the conundrum. It's not a test, it's an invitation. A few students snickered. He continued, "No one in this institution has ever solved it, nor has anyone before. I've refined it over 2 decades. If you can break it, your name leaves this university differently. If you fail, well, you're not the first." His eyes fell directly on Cassian. "Take your time," he added. "Sometimes genius requires silence." The silence that followed was hollow. No one volunteered. No one moved. Because they knew what this was. It was Hartwick's signature game. A ritual of intellectual cruelty, whispered about across classes and generations. Once every few years he'd reveal an impossible problem, call it a path to immortality, and use it to humble a student he believed too bold, too bright, too different. But this was the first time he'd used it on a freshman. And the first time the student was black. Cassian didn't raise his hand. He knew a trap when he saw one. But he also knew math, like some people knew breath. He felt it, and right there, on that board, buried beneath the intimidation and technical theater, he saw a whisper of familiarity, a rhythm. Not from lectures, not from textbooks, from pain. Later that day, Cassian sat alone in his dorm. His laptop open, notebooks spread around him, books pulled from multiple departments, theoretical math, computational logic, even historical theses. Most students didn't bother. They'd already decided it was performative, unsolvable, another one of Hartwick's theatrical flexes. But Cassian wasn't most students. He started seeing things in the problem that weren't about numbers. They were about omission, intentional gaps, loops that fed themselves endlessly. He traced the structure backward, analyzing not just the formula, but how they had been constructed. And then it hit him. The problem wasn't new. He remembered an old workbook from his middle school math club, a ragged binder donated by a retired teacher from a local HBCU. Inside had been a series of equations labeled "Black Mathematicians Uncredited." He remembered flipping past them at the time, not knowing their significance. Now one pattern in the Hartwick problem triggered that old memory. Not an exact match, but a fingerprint, like someone had stolen an original melody and rewritten it in a different key. It shook him. Could Hartwick have lifted this from someone else? And if so, who? Cassian dove deeper, scouring through archive repositories, referencing old math journals, his walls filled with paper. His whiteboard became a war zone of logic. For 3 days, he barely slept. He only left his dorm to eat or photocopy articles. Other students noticed, some joking that he'd gone full a beautiful mind, others whispering that the scholarship kid really thinks he can solve Hartwick's trap. The racial subtext never left. "You know they say black kids are better at rhythm than logic," one student said in the cafeteria, not knowing Cassian was behind him. Cassian didn't respond. He filed it away. Because now, the problem wasn't just academic. It was ancestral. This wasn't about solving an equation anymore. It was about reclaiming stolen space. On the 5th night, his breakthrough came. It was nearly 2 a.m. The dorm was silent. Everyone else was asleep or drunk. Cassian sat at his desk surrounded by printouts and graphite-smeared notebooks. His eyes bloodshot. His fingers shaking. Then it clicked. A step, the one Hartwick had hidden under layered proofs, collapsed into a simple transposition. The illusion broke. The logic realigned. The problem wasn't impossible. It was deliberately obfuscated. Cassian stood up, heart racing. He scrawled the final logic tree on his notebook, page after page, confirming, simplifying, cross-verifying. It held. He had it. He actually had it. Cassian didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just sat back, breath shallow, staring at what no one else had seen, not because they couldn't, but because they were never meant to. The conundrum wasn't unsolvable. It was shielded, wrapped in arrogance and institutional gatekeeping. It was a mirror of systemic exclusion, not mathematical complexity. And a black freshman had just shattered it. He opened his laptop and began transferring the full proof into LaTeX line by line, citation by citation, including the notes from the forgotten workbook he'd retrieved online. He worked until the sun hinted at the horizon. At 6:12 a.m., he clicked save, then leaned back in his chair, eyes closing for just a moment. When he opened them again, his screen was black. Not a screensaver. Not a restart.
Wiped.
His heart dropped. He reached for the power button.
Nothing.
Cold panic gripped his chest. He unplugged the charger, plugged it back in. Still black. Then on the lower corner of the screen, a cursor flickered for a split second, then disappeared. Cassian bolted upright. He checked the hard drive. The external one too. Empty. Every file, every note, every proof, gone. His phone buzzed. One notification. Login attempt from unknown device. Then another. Then another. Then a text. Next time remember who owns the board. No number. No sender. He stood still, the text glowing on his screen. Who had done this? Only 2 people had access to that level of system intrusion on campus. The IT department and senior faculty. Unless he yanked his backpack open and reached for his notebook, his paper back up, only to find the last 2 pages had been torn out. He froze. Someone had been in his dorm. While he slept, the reality hit like a gut punch. This wasn't just intellectual theft anymore. It was sabotage. And the more he pushed, the more danger he attracted. Hartwick's problem wasn't meant to be solved. Not by him. Because solving it didn't just challenge ego. It exposed everything beneath Harvard's polished veneer. Who was allowed to be brilliant, and who was merely tolerated until they got too close to truth. Cassian's fingers shook as he dialed the campus IT line. No answer. He checked his window. Still locked. But then he saw something taped to the outside glass. Barely visible in the dawn light. A single sticky note. Try again, and the next file we delete is your future. Cassian turned and found a flash drive on his desk. He didn't recognize, marked with a single word, proof. Cassian didn't tell anyone. Not his roommate, not his advisor, not even the IT department whose job it was to track hacks. He sat in the pale dawn light, staring at the flash drive labeled proof and the sticky note outside his window, and he made a choice. Silence. Not because he was afraid, but because he already knew how Harvard handled voices like his. Black students who spoke out became aggressive. Those who asked questions became suspicious. The ones who dared accuse tenured white professors were troubled, delusional, or quietly dismissed as unstable. He had seen it before, not here but back home, in high school, in a district that underfunded brilliance and over-policed skin. So he did what he'd always done. He adapted. He shoved the flash drive into the back of his sock drawer, untouched. If it was bait, he wasn't biting. Then he began again. This time, by hand. He pulled out a fresh notebook, wide-ruled, plain black cover, and began recreating the proof from memory, line by line, equation by equation. He didn't just solve the problem, he re-owned it. He knew it by rhythm now, the way some people know songs. But he didn't keep the notebook in one place. Instead, he tore each finished page and hid them. Inside library textbooks, behind ceiling tiles in unused lecture halls, between couch cushions in the Black Student Union lounge. He trusted paper more than screens now. Paper couldn't be wiped. Paper couldn't be traced. He moved like a fugitive genius, coding brilliance into scraps, building his proof in secret like it was contraband. Each time he wrote, the past crept in, uninvited, but unavoidable. He remembered being in 3rd grade, raising his hand to answer a multiplication question, and watching the teacher call on every white kid but him. He remembered the counselor who said, maybe community college is a better track when he mentioned MIT. He remembered the way his principal handed out detention slips, like candy during Black History Month, but asked Cassian to speak about his people's achievements during assemblies. He had grown up in a world that only liked black excellence, when it came with a football jersey. And now, a Harvard professor was daring him to raise his hand, not out of belief in his potential, but to publicly break him. At night he slept with the notebook pages pressed under his mattress. During the day he retyped sections at different computer labs across campus, emailing encrypted drafts to an alias only he could access. No 2 copies were the same. This wasn't just mathematics anymore. This was survival. One afternoon, in the library basement, he watched from a distance as a grad student picked up a textbook that had one of his pages inside. Cassian froze. The student flipped the book open, glanced at the handwritten sheet, and casually used it as a bookmark before walking away. Cassian let out a breath. He had turned the campus into a maze of scattered genius. Harvard didn't know it yet, but the quiet black kid they dismissed had transformed their ivory tower into a live wire of subversion. But even in his calculated solitude, the walls were watching. Students began to look at him differently, not with respect, but with a strange, simmering contempt. Whispers increased. Rumors leaked. One night, while leaving the math department, He passed a group of white students laughing near the steps. "Hey, Cassian," one called. "Cracked the conundrum yet? Or just cracking under pressure?" The others chuckled. He didn't stop walking. But the next morning, outside the dining hall, a flyer was taped to the wall, Hartwick's problem printed at the top. And beneath it, the words, "Ward claims to be working on this. Pray for him." Signed anonymously, of course. He tore it down without comment. He started eating alone, sitting in the back of classes, avoiding eye contact. He kept moving, kept writing, kept rebuilding. But the weight began to push at the edges of him. He'd left home to find brilliance, and instead found bias dressed in theory. One evening, while rewriting a particularly complex proof step inside a dorm laundry room, his phone vibrated with an email notification. He glanced at the subject line and froze. "Office of Academic Ethics. Immediate action required." His chest tightened. He opened it. The message was brief. "Cassian Ward, we have received a report regarding potential academic dishonesty related to an active mathematics problem assigned under Dr. Emil Hartwick. Your presence is required at an ethics review hearing this Friday. Details and expectations are attached. Failure to attend will result in disciplinary action. Office of Academic Integrity." His breath stopped. Academic dishonesty, a phrase so dangerous, it could dismantle everything. Attached was a formal PDF with time, location, and a list of attendees. At the bottom, in smaller print, "Professor Emil Hartwick has submitted supporting documentation." Cassian stared at the screen, heart pounding, throat dry. He'd never submitted anything. He'd never gone public. But someone, somehow, had already taken his work and accused him of stealing it. A knock on his door followed 10 seconds later. He opened it slowly. His RA stood there, face uneasy. "Hey man," he said, not meeting Cassian's eyes. "I was told to give you this. A manila envelope. No return name." Cassian took it, closed the door. Inside were 3 printed screenshots, allegedly from his own email, showing attachments with his proof, dated before he'd ever backed it up. The last page was a signed statement from Hartwick. The submitted solution contains language, structure, and mathematical steps directly lifted from internal department files. Mr. Ward's work matches drafts I have personally archived. Drafts never shared publicly. Cassian nearly crushed the paper in his hands. Hartwick had framed him. The flash drive labeled proof, the one he'd ignored. It wasn't baked. It was planted evidence. Someone had used it to embed files with dates earlier than his own work. Files Hartwick could then claim were his. A digital trap. Cassian's eyes burned. They didn't want to just discredit him. They wanted to erase him, not only from the conundrum, but from Harvard itself. He sat down, pulled out his final notebook, and checked the last hidden pages. They were still there, but now they were evidence in a war he never consented to fight. He thought of his mother, of the way she held his face the night before he left for Cambridge, and said, "If you ever feel like they're coming for your name, you fight quiet, you fight smart, and you never let them see you beg." He didn't cry. He sharpened a pencil and turned to the next page. As he folded the envelope and slid it under his mattress, his phone buzzed again, this time with an audio file sent from an anonymous number. The subject line read, "You weren't the first. He did it before. Listen." The moment Cassian clicked play on the anonymous audio file, the voice that came through his headphones made his stomach twist. It was shaky, older, and desperate. A man whispering into what sounded like a tape recorder. "He did it to me. Hartwick. Spring of '07. I submitted my paper on continuous prime structures. He took it, added a theorem I hadn't finished, published it a year later, under his own name, said I fabricated my research. I didn't fight. I didn't have the credentials, and no one believed a black grad student from Philly over a white tenured professor. If you're hearing this, he's doing it again. And you're not alone." Cassian sat frozen in his chair, the shadows of his dorm stretching across the room. The file ended abruptly. No name, no timestamp, no explanation. But it was enough. He wasn't the first, and suddenly, everything snapped into place. Hartwick's arrogance, the setup, the challenge, the fake flash drive, the plagiarized thesis from Alton Keys buried in the archives. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern, and Harvard had been silent for years. The next morning, Cassian walked into the Office of Academic Integrity, not defeated but focused. The panel that waited for him in the hearing room was a wall of formality, 4 faculty members, 1 admin rep, and Hartwick seated to the right. Arms folded, expression cool. The head of the panel, Dean Murrow, looked up from his clipboard. Mr. Ward, thank you for appearing. You are here today, under suspicion of academic misconduct related to the Hartwick conundrum. Cassian said nothing. They walked through the accusations, screenshots, file timestamps, Hartwick statements, all vague but soaked in innuendo. Words like suspicious, unexpectedly complex, anomalous comprehension. Then came the line that changed the air in the room. Hartwick leaned forward, lacing his fingers. It's just that, for a first-year student, especially one without formal math competition experience or prior publication, this level of conceptual leap feels unlikely. He didn't say the words, but everyone heard them. Unlikely for someone like you. Cassian clenched his jaw, not out of fear but fury. Because this wasn't just academic dishonesty. It was character assassination masked in formality. He wasn't being accused of cheating. He was being accused of not knowing his place. And outside that room, the fallout had already begun. Screenshots of the complaint had leaked. Somehow a student-run gossip page called Crimson Speak had posted excerpts from the hearing file. A poll beneath the post read, "Did affirmative action give us a fraud? Should Cassian Ward be expelled?" Thousands of votes. Hundreds of comments. Racist dog whistles dressed as academic concern. He came from a public school. No way he wrote that proof. Not surprised. They always blame the system when they get caught. Diversity hires lead to this. And then, one that hit Cassian the hardest. He'll cry racism until he's famous. Watch. He shut his laptop and sat in the dark. His inbox was full of interview requests. Hate mail, a few anonymous supporters. But nothing real. No professor spoke up. No mentor defended him. Because he had no mentor. The system had ensured that too. But someone else was watching. Eileen Drake, a third-year PhD student in the applied math program, had never spoken to Cassian directly. But she'd been in Hartwick's circles long enough to see how he operated. She'd seen the microaggressions, the favoritism, the sudden disappearances of promising students of color, and she'd stayed quiet. Until now. She began digging. At first it was just curiosity. But soon it became obsession. She searched university archives, internal emails, forgotten abstracts, and old faculty meeting notes. What she found made her sick. 4 separate complaints over 2 decades, all from black or brown students, in the math department. All filed quietly, all disappeared. 1. In 1999, from a Nigerian doctoral student, status, resolved, no action taken. Another in 2007. A master's student, whose final thesis was flagged for thematic overlap with Hartwick's own work, 6 months after Hartwick had been granted access to the student's draft during a closed review session. And then buried deep in a faculty review PDF from 2002, Eileen found a note in the margin. Concerns about Dr. Hetz's mentorship disparity, particularly toward minority students. Recommend observation. But no follow-up, no investigation. Just silence. She stared at the screen. The pattern was undeniable. Hartwick wasn't just ruthless. He was a repeat offender, enabled by a system that valued tenure more than truth. The next day, Eileen requested a private meeting with the dean of students, bringing printed copies of everything she'd uncovered. She expected shock, maybe support. What she got was stone-faced caution. Dean Ravel skimmed the papers without blinking. "You understand the weight of these accusations," he said, setting them down. "If what you're suggesting is unsubstantiated, it could be seen as defamation." Eileen didn't flinch. "I'm not accusing. I'm presenting patterns Harvard has chosen not to see." The dean folded his hands. "Then perhaps you should consider your future here very carefully. You're a promising candidate, Miss Drake. Don't jeopardize that." That night, Eileen didn't sleep. She emailed the documents to herself, then backed them up to 2 encrypted drives. And then she made a decision. She walked across campus, heart racing, and knocked on Cassian's door. He opened it slowly, wary. "I believe you," she said simply. He stared at her, skeptical. She held up a folder. "I can prove he's done this before." Cassian stepped aside. She entered. They sat on the edge of his bed while she laid out the evidence, one by one. Names, cases, disappearances, proof. He listened in silence, then finally asked, "Why now?" She hesitated. "Because I'm done being part of a department that protects predators. And because, You're the first one who won't let him bury this quietly. For the first time in weeks, Cassian felt something shift. Not hope, but alliance. They worked through the night, assembling a timeline, a presentation, a plan. They would file a counterclaim, armed with receipts. They would build a dossier so airtight Harvard couldn't ignore it. But even as they strategized, the university moved faster. The next morning, Cassian received a second letter, this one public, posted on the student portal. A formal announcement. Mr. Cassian Ward has been placed under academic probation pending resolution of plagiarism allegations. Until such time, he is barred from representing Harvard in any academic competition or publication. His hands trembled as he read it. No hearing yet. No defense. Just a verdict dressed in policy. He was silenced before he could even speak. And across campus, the fallout exploded. His name trended on Twitter. Half of Black Twitter rallied behind him, demanding transparency, accountability, justice. The other half of Harvard? Silent. Hartwick? Still teaching. Still smiling. Still untouchable. Just as Cassian closes the announcement, Eileen burst into his room, breathless. She holds up a dusty folder pulled from the archives. Cassian. He didn't just do this once. He buried someone else completely. Another black student. And he made sure no one ever heard of him again. The folder Eileen dropped onto Cassian's desk was thick with time. Yellowed paper edges, faded typeface, carbon copy impressions like ghosts whispering through the decades. Cassian opened it slowly, his fingers grazing the top sheet. Solomon Vance, Theorem on Probabilistic Number Structures, 1983. Beneath it a departmental memo with 3 words circled in red, no publication approved. This name, Eileen's voice trembled. I'd never heard it before. Not in any Harvard records, not in our alumni databases. It's like he was erased. Cassian flipped to the next document. A research paper, cleanly written, with math so elegant, it pulled the breath from his chest. The language was modern, ahead of its time, not just theory, revolutionary structure, and yet the final pages were redacted, the university seal stamped diagonally across the redactions. How'd you find this? He asked. Eileen leaned against the desk. I had to go down 3 levels beneath Widener. This wasn't just misfiled. Someone wanted it forgotten. Cassian knew immediately what he was seeing. Not just a buried paper, but a genius buried alive. Vance had solved a core component of the conundrum before Hartwick even had tenure. And now, it was clear, Hartwick hadn't just stolen from Cassian. He'd been doing it for decades. The next day Eileen requested a closed-door meeting with Dr. Russell, the department chair. She arrived early, carrying a bound copy of the evidence. He glanced at her, more annoyed than curious. Drake, I've been told you're stirring things up. I'm surfacing things that were meant to stay buried. He sighed, gesturing for her to sit. She remained standing.
Listen, he said carefully. I know you think you're doing the right thing, but going after Hartwick, it's not just risky, it's political suicide.
She placed the folder on his desk. This is theft. Repeated, racialized theft. He didn't even open it. Drop this. For the good of the university. Eileen's jaw tensed. For the good of who? Russell looked her in the eye. You're smart, Eileen. Don't throw away your future on someone else's ghost. When she returned to Cassian's dorm, she didn't speak at first, just sat on his bed and stared at the floor. They're not going to help us, she said. Not the department. Not the deans. No one. Cassian already knew. He'd stopped expecting help the moment he saw the word unlikely in Hartwick's report. The university had paused his student ID. He was barred from class, labs, and lecture halls, until the hearing. His access to digital platforms had been revoked. Even the library refused him entry. To them he no longer existed, but erasure had never stopped him. Cassian started catching the train to Roxbury every morning, using a borrowed student pass from a friend. It was a place he understood, not because it was easy, but because it didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. Strip malls and cracked sidewalks, kids dodging statistics like bullets. He found a small youth center with an old whiteboard, and offered to tutor. At first, the director eyed him skeptically. Harvard? She asked. They let you out? He smiled faintly. I let myself out. Word spread fast. Soon, a group of teens began showing up daily. Names like Jalen, Kia, Devonte, Treshawn. Kids who reminded Cassian of his younger self. Bright, cynical, but desperate for something real. He brought his notes, sanitized them, translated high-level theory into relatable terms. He used rap patterns to explain symmetry, basketball stats to teach probability. The kids responded not because the math was easy, but because Cassian didn't talk down to them. One afternoon, as he erased a long equation from the board, a kid named Jordan, 12 years old, hoodie half-zipped, sneakers too big, pointed at Cassian's notebook and said, "Yo, that symbol right there. I seen that before." Cassian paused. "Where?" Jordan scratched his head. "Old dude from my building. Crazy smart. He got all these papers, formulas and stuff. Never lets nobody see him, though. Said Harvard stole his life." Cassian's pulse quickened. "What's his name?" Jordan shrugged. "He goes by Mr. Saul. Real quiet. Used to teach back in the day. Says math ain't free." Cassian's eyes widened. "Mr. Saul. Solomon Vance." He knelt in front of Jordan. "Do you think you can introduce me?" The boy hesitated. "You cool. But if I bring a Harvard dude around, he might trip." Cassian opened his bag, pulled out a page from Vance's original theorem, one Eileen had found, still legible. He handed it to Jordan. "Give him this. Tell him I'm not from Harvard. I'm from the truth." The next day, Jordan returned with a crumpled sticky note, an address. No name, just Tuesday, 6 p.m. Come alone. Cassian stared at it, heart pounding. Back in Cambridge, Eileen kept digging. She began cross-referencing Hartwick's published work with dissertations that had been quietly removed or marked incomplete. A pattern emerged. Each time Hartwick released a paper, a promising black or brown student's name disappeared from the department the semester before. She mapped them all, 8 in total, spanning 27 years, and not a single investigation. It was a trail of destruction so elegant it could have been an algorithm. And at the center, a man Harvard worshipped. Even now, she emailed the compiled data to a single outside source, a math-focused journalist who had once written an expose on citation theft in academia. Then she turned off her phone and locked her door. Meanwhile, Cassian stood outside a crumbling apartment in Roxbury, notebook in hand. The door opened a crack. A sliver of face. Eyes old but burning. A voice like rusted steel. "You Cassian?" He nodded. "Show me." Cassian held up the page. Vance's theorem. The door opened fully. He stepped inside a room that smelled like memory. Books stacked to the ceiling, chalk dust floating like snow. On the far wall, a blackboard covered in equations. Some familiar, others lost to time.
"I've been waiting 30 years for someone to knock on that door,"
Solomon Vance said, walking slowly to the board. "Didn't think it'd be a kid." Cassian swallowed. "You wrote the original conundrum." Vance chuckled, dryly. "It wasn't called that when I wrote it." He explained everything. How he developed the theorem in 1982. How Hartwick was a junior researcher then. How he shared it during a private workshop. A week later, his research was flagged for replication inconsistencies. Harvard offered him a quiet exit. He left. Changed his name. Never published again. "I built a bridge," Vance said bitterly. He painted it white and put his name on it. Cassian sat across from him, stunned. "You're not just a survivor," he said quietly. "You're proof." Vance nodded. "And so are you." Cassian pulled out his notebook to show his reconstructed proof. But Vance stopped him with one raised hand and said, "That's not all of it. There's a second half to the problem, the part I never got to write. And if Hartwick knew what it revealed, he'd burn Harvard to the ground before letting you finish it." Solomon Vance poured tea like it was science. Measured, precise, intentional. He moved slow, not from weakness but calculation. Every word he spoke carried weight, as if he had learned the hard way, that speaking too fast gave people time to twist your truth. Cassian sat across from him, heart still hammering from the truth Vance had just revealed. "There's a second half?" he repeated. Vance nodded, lowering himself into the cracked leather armchair beneath a rusted floor lamp. "What Hartwick put on the board, that's a mirror of the first theorem. The visible part. What I built went further. It didn't just predict sequence anomalies. It implied structural collapse in traditional number theory." He paused, sipping. Hartwick was terrified of what it meant. Cassian's mind raced. Why? Because it would have exposed foundational flaws in the very system he worshipped. And worse, Vance leaned forward, eyes burning. It was built by a black man. A silence stretched between them. One of recognition, one of generational theft. "I was 23 when I presented the original proof," Vance said. Bright-eyed, 10 steps ahead, thinking if the math was good enough they'd have no choice but to listen. He shook his head slowly. They didn't just ignore me, they discredited me, sent concerns to grant funders, froze my advisor's support, leaked parts of my work without citation, then told me I lacked originality. Then Hartwick, Cassian murmured, rewrote my ideas in his own language. Changed symbols, modified sequencing, removed the cultural structure behind it, sanitized it, made it palatable. Vance stared into the distance. That's how Harvard works. It doesn't kill you directly. It lets you vanish until you do it yourself. Cassian opened his own notebook and laid out his partial proof. Vance leaned in, scanning the pages. His expression changed. Not surprise, but familiarity. You mapped the same route, he said. But you walked it alone. Cassian's voice cracked. I thought I'd discovered something new. You did, Vance replied. You discovered how history repeats itself. For the next hour, they sat in the dim glow of the apartment, chalking equations on a sheet of cardboard Vance had nailed to the wall. Cassian spoke in bursts, full of passion and patterns, and Vance filled in the silences with wisdom. Together they traced the theorem's lost path, unlocking the second half that had never seen the light of day. It wasn't just advanced, it was revolutionary. A formula that blended prime collapse structures with sociological pattern logic, suggesting that mathematics wasn't just a neutral science, but a language coded by those in power. If proven, it would upend more than academia. It would challenge the very myth that math is colorless. You realize what this means, Cassian said quietly. If we present it, they won't let you, Vance replied. Then I'll make them. Vance studied him. You're brave, he said. But bravery gets buried. Not this time, Cassian said. But even as fire lit his voice, he knew the danger ahead. Because Harvard wasn't just a school. It was an empire, and he was threatening to shake its foundation. That night, Cassian returned to Cambridge, under cover of darkness. He avoided campus. His ID card no longer worked, so Eileen snuck him into the back door of the graduate student lab. He laid out his notes. She stared at them in awe. This is beyond anything Hartwick ever published. Cassian nodded. Because he didn't understand it. He only understood how to steal it. Together they began building a submission packet. One meant not for Harvard but for an international math journal, with a reputation for independent peer review. A journal Hartwick couldn't touch. They encrypted the file. Added footnotes. Historical context. A preface authored by Solomon Vance himself under a pseudonym. Then, without fanfare, they uploaded it. It was done. But as the file uploaded, Cassian's phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. We know where you've been, and we're watching where you're going. He showed Eileen. She exhaled sharply. They're scared. No, Cassian said. They're angry. And anger from people in power was never about justice. It was about control. The next day, the journal responded with a surprising message. We've received your submission. However, due to the similarity of your framework to Professor Emil Hartwick's previous publications, we require a signed verification from a faculty advisor to proceed with peer review. Eileen went pale. They think you plagiarized him. No, Cassian said. They think he owns the truth. Harvard had done it again, flipped the narrative, and the only person who could verify Cassian's work was the man who stole it. Eileen bit her lip. What if we go public? Release the entire story. They'll destroy Vance. They'll call him unstable. Call me vengeful. Say we falsified documents. She paced. There's gotta be another way, she said. Another witness. Someone from the department. Cassian leaned back. Then an idea struck him. There was one person. Hartwick's former TA. The one who'd mysteriously left mid-semester years ago. A name Eileen had briefly come across in her research. Marcus Denby. He had filed an internal complaint in 2011, and then vanished from academic circles entirely. If they could find him, and if he was willing to speak, everything could change. Eileen started digging. Cassian started planning. Because now the stakes were no longer academic. They were historical. It wasn't about getting credit anymore. It was about ending a cycle of erasure that had spanned generations. And in the middle of it, a question echoed in his head. How many black geniuses had Harvard quietly erased? And how many more would it erase if he failed? Eileen burst through Cassian's door, hours later, eyes wide, voice trembling. I found him. Marcus Denby. He's alive, and he's ready to talk. But he says Hartwick didn't just steal research. He destroyed a student's life to protect himself. and that student was institutionalized. Solomon Vance stared at the dusty chalkboard in his living room, his hand hovering over an unfinished equation. The sun through the blinds cast lines across his face, deepening the shadows beneath his eyes. "Do you know what it's like," he said quietly, "to be told you're dangerous just for being brilliant?" Cassian stood nearby, arms folded, notebook tucked under one arm. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Vance continued, his voice low but sharp. "They didn't just reject my ideas. They made me believe I was losing my mind. First, they questioned my data, then my methods. Then they questioned my tone, my presence in meetings, my professionalism. The more I defended my work, the more they painted me as unstable. Eventually, I didn't know if I was a threat or a fraud." He turned, face trembling. "They didn't need to kill my reputation. They made me kill it myself." Cassian swallowed hard. "You could have fought back." Vance chuckled, bitter and tired. In 1983, a black man challenging white authority in Harvard mathematics? They would have buried me in a footnote. The words hung heavy. They weren't just history. They were a warning. Vance's eyes narrowed. "Don't make the mistake I did, Cassian. Genius won't save you. It only makes the fall louder." But Cassian had already made his choice. Back in Cambridge, Eileen worked in silence. Her dorm lights were always off. She used campus VPNs, student lab accounts, and disposable emails. Each night she leaked a new piece of evidence, not enough to identify Vance, but enough to rattle the gates. The first leak: Hartwick's redacted emails, ones she'd recovered from an archived server. Messages that mocked overconfident minority students, dismissed inclusive grading policies as handouts, and referred to a black research assistant as our department's charity case. The second leak: a scanned page from Vance's original manuscript, the core proof Hartwick had mimicked. A post-it note was attached in the scan, with Hartwick's handwriting, "Needs sanitizing before publishing." The third leak: a spreadsheet showing departmental funding cuts, disproportionately targeting black and brown student projects between two. Within 48 hours, the campus erupted. Posters of Hartwick's face with the word TIEF plastered across his eyes appeared on lecture hall doors. A sit-in took place outside the mathematics building. Student leaders from other Ivy League schools joined the online protest, tagging Harvard with hashtags like "erase erasure" and "mathematics is not white property." Cassian watched it all unfold from the shadows. He wasn't a face on the posters. He wasn't on the live streams. He couldn't be, because Harvard still had him on gag order, a leash masked as procedure. The email arrived just after the second leak. Cassian Ward, due to the ongoing investigation regarding academic integrity and unauthorized access to sensitive departmental material, you are hereby issued a formal gag order. You are prohibited from publicly commenting on any aspect of the ongoing case, including through social media, interviews, or classroom discussion. Violation may result in expulsion and legal action. Office of Academic Standards. No explanation. No hearing. Just silence. Cassian stared at the email, fingers trembling. They weren't just trying to suppress his voice. They were trying to turn him into a myth, something easier to distort. Across campus, students chanted his name, professors debated policy, news outlets sent requests for statements. But he couldn't speak, even when the world finally wanted to hear him. Harvard made sure he stayed invisible. Eileen was furious. They suspended Hartwick because they had no choice. But they're protecting their brand. If they let you speak, it legitimizes everything they covered up. They want Hartwick gone, Cassian said. But only if they can keep Harvard clean. She stared at him. "So what do we do?" Cassian didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the corner of her dorm and pulled out a folded envelope from his coat. Inside, the completed proof, signed by both him and Solomon Vance, dated and notarized. A carbon copy was already with the International Journal. But this one was personal. "We release it," he said. "Not the leak, not the half story, the whole truth." She looked at him, eyes wide. "Cassian, if you do this, you're risking everything." He nodded. "They already took everything. I'm not asking anymore." That night, Eileen posted the full proof, hosted on a private website, authored by Cassian Ward and SV. No titles, no institutional logos. At the top of the page, a single quote from Vance: "Genius uncredited is history denied." Within hours, it spread, first through academic Twitter, then Reddit, then international math forums. Professors around the world began dissecting it live. Forums lit up. A Nobel Prize-winning statistician commented that the proof was more than correct. It's disruptive. But the most viral moment came when a black mathematician at Princeton posted a video. I taught this same sequence 10 years ago, and was told it lacked academic maturity. Now Harvard calls it innovation. Funny how math becomes genius when it wears the right skin. The backlash was swift. Harvard released a vague press statement. We are aware of recent developments and take all allegations seriously. We remain committed to equity, excellence, and intellectual integrity. Translation: we won't admit guilt unless forced. But then came the breaking point. A student journalist from the Crimson leaked an internal memo, one confirming that the administration had known about Vance's case for years. That Hartwick's name had been quietly removed from a review committee. After a private settlement, Cassian sat on the dorm floor beside Eileen as they read the article. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He just exhaled. But Harvard wasn't finished. 2 days later, campus security delivered an envelope to his dorm.
Legal action.
Not against Hartwick, but against Cassian. The charge? Violation of academic protocol and unauthorized release of intellectual property. They had turned his truth into a breach. The letter was signed not by a department head, but by the university's legal counsel. It wasn't just punishment. It was retaliation. As Cassian stared at the legal document in silence, Eileen's phone buzzed with a new email alert. She opened it and gasped. It's from a Harvard whistleblower, an administrator. He has access to faculty meeting recordings, and he says there's audio of Hartwick admitting the conundrum wasn't his. The morning after the leak exploded across the academic world, Harvard's iconic gates stood solemn under a gray sky, flanked by protesters holding cardboard signs smeared with rain and rage. Stolen brilliance is still theft. Back genius deserves credit. From Vance to Cassian. And nah. Cassian didn't attend the protest. He couldn't. His legal gag order hadn't been lifted. Instead, it had grown teeth. The envelope he received the day before had been marked confidential mediation notice. Inside was a non-disclosure agreement drafted by the Office of Institutional Relations, paired with a disturbingly polished offer. Complete your coursework privately. Retain access to limited campus resources. Do not speak about the conundrum, Solomon Vance, or Dr. Emil Hartwick. No publication, no recognition. In exchange, no further academic penalties will be pursued. Harvard Office of Academic Affairs. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just silence in silk wrapping. Cassian folded the letter in half without reading the last paragraph. Harvard didn't want justice. It wanted quiet. The official narrative was already in motion. Hartwick had been suspended pending ongoing review. The university published a terse statement. Harvard University affirms its commitment to academic integrity, equity, and historical accuracy. We are conducting a thorough investigation into recent allegations. But it was empty air, a performance. Privately, Hartwick hadn't lost his tenure. He hadn't lost his influence. He hadn't even lost access to the department's Slack. He was preparing a comeback. Leaked messages confirmed it. Hartwick had begun emailing select colleagues and alumni donors, claiming he was the victim of a smear campaign. He framed the leaked proof as a deeply flawed, emotionally manipulated draft co-authored by a disgruntled dropout and a discredited has-been. Then he held a private Zoom call with department loyalists. On it he stated the most dangerous lie yet. The conundrum was never meant to be solved, not because it's unsolvable, but because it was theoretical art. What these students have done is academic vandalism. A recording of the call leaked within hours. But still, no consequences. No resignation. Just more carefully worded internal memos. Cassian paced the perimeter of Eileen's apartment, voice low and bitter. They think if they delay long enough, the world will move on. They're probably right, Eileen said. Attention spans are shorter than tenure terms. They sat in silence, watching protest footage stream across social media. One clip stood out. A young black girl, maybe 15, standing at the gates holding a sign that read, "I want to be a mathematician. But will they let me be one?" Cassian stared at it for a long time, then finally spoke. "I'm not Solomon." "No?" Eileen said. "You're Cassian, and you're not going away." They opened the final draft of the proof, the one co-signed by Vance, annotated with footnotes, translated into LaTeX and cleaned for peer review. The metadata was scrubbed, the identities were encrypted, the math was bulletproof. It had taken months of reassembly, sleepless nights, and whispered consultations from mathematicians outside Harvard's circle. But it was ready. They submitted it to the Euler Review, a prestigious international mathematics journal known for independent vetting. No Harvard bias, no institutional chokehold. They clicked submit. A countdown bar filled the screen. Submission complete. Cassian exhaled for the first time in days. 3 days later, the journal replied. The email was short. Dear Mr. Ward, your manuscript titled Sequence Collapse and Racial Erasure, a Theorem Beyond the Conundrum, has been accepted for peer review. However, in accordance with our academic protocols, we require verification of authorship from your listed institutional advisor, Professor Emil Hartwick. Please have Professor Hartwick submit a signed authorship confirmation within 7 business days to proceed. Editorial Board. The Euler Review. Cassian stared at the screen. Eileen leaned over his shoulder. No, they can't, but they could. Harvard still had him listed under Hartwick's name. The university's internal system, which hadn't updated since the investigation paused, showed Hartwick as his academic mentor. Legally, Hartwick owned any work submitted under Cassian's enrollment. The system, even when confronted with truth, protected the abuser. Let me call them, Eileen said, already opening her email. We can explain the conflict. Cassian stopped her. No. They'll delay. Push it into the next review cycle. By then the media will have moved on, and Harvard will frame it as revisiting an outdated claim. His fists clenched. They won't kill the proof. They'll starve it. He stood, pacing the room, heart thudding. If I ask Hartwick to sign it, I'm legitimizing him. But if I don't, they'll say I bypassed procedure. Eileen rubbed her temples. So what do we do? Cassian looked out the window, the Harvard skyline etched in gray stone across the horizon. We find someone who outranks Hartwick.
Eileen blinked. What?
If we can't go through him, we go over him. Find a professor, a mathematician, someone international, outside Harvard, who'll co-sign the authorship based on the work itself.
That'll be hard.
These circles protect each other. Cassian turned. But not all of them. That night, Cassian made a list. Mathematicians who had praised the leaked proof publicly. Faculty at other universities who had quietly expressed support, even a few who had challenged Hartwick's past work in academic journals. Names circled, emails sent. 2 ignored him. 1 replied with a kind decline. But 1, Dr. Penelope Graves, a mathematics chair at a rival Ivy League, wrote back the next morning. Her email was brief.
Mr. Ward.
Your proof is legitimate, original, and overdue. I reviewed your draft independently last month and found it to be both accurate and historically urgent. I am willing to verify authorship, but I will need access to the full author history, and I expect backlash. Send me the files. Let's cause some necessary discomfort. Dr. Penelope Graves. Cassian stared at the message, a mixture of relief and disbelief flooding him. They weren't just moving forward. They were pushing through. But even as the winds shifted, Harvard's machine kept turning. The university sent him another notice, this time from the Office of Communications. We are aware of attempts to publish work currently under university review. Please be advised that any external academic communication without administrative approval may result in permanent academic record alteration. Alteration, not expulsion, not rejection. They were threatening to rewrite his academic history. Eileen read the line twice. They'll bury your transcript. Strip your degree. Make sure no one ever hires you. Cassian nodded slowly, which means we're getting close. Just as they prepared the authorship package for Dr. Graves, Cassian's inbox pinged. A new message, no subject, from an encrypted email. He opened it. A single sentence blinked on the screen. If this gets published, check your parents' mortgage. The morning after Cassian received the mortgage threat, he stood outside his parents' small brick house on the south side of Chicago. Not in person, but through a live satellite image pulled from a real estate surveillance database. He hadn't told them anything. They didn't know about the threats, the tribunal, or the manuscript submission. To them he was still just their son, studying hard, keeping his head down. But someone knew. Someone had found their address, their mortgage file. Someone wanted him to understand. This fight wasn't just his anymore. Eileen sat across from him, staring at his laptop screen. This isn't just intimidation, she said. It's institutional muscle. Cassian closed the screen slowly. It means the paper's real, and it meant someone was scared enough to use families as leverage. That afternoon, the Euler Review sent its official response. The email loaded slowly, like a heartbeat counting down. Your manuscript, sequence collapse and racial erasure. Has passed initial peer review. We recognize the historical importance and mathematical depth of your work. However, in absence of authorship verification from your institutional advisor, final publication remains paused. We will hold your submission for 10 days. If no verification is received, we will issue a withdrawal. The Euler Review Editorial Board. 10 days. 10 days to convince the world his name belonged on what he built, or see his work vanish again. Harvard offered him a path, laced in poison. An email arrived the same hour from the Dean of Academic Affairs. Mr. Ward, we understand the unique complexity surrounding your manuscript. While the university cannot publicly verify your claim, we will offer a faculty co-signature in exchange for listed co-authorship with Dr. Hartwick. This will allow publication while preserving departmental order. Please respond by Friday. Office of Scholarly Resolution. Co-authorship. With the very man who had stolen from him, discredited him, and tried to erase Vance before him. Cassian paced the small room in Eileen's apartment, fists clenched, voice dry. So let me get this straight. I do the work, I fight for the truth, and now they want me to share credit to make peace. Eileen's reply was instant. They want to sanitize your victory. She knew it too. Cassian's name in print without a white academic tether was dangerous. It would force a reckoning they weren't ready for. The department chair, the provost, even a few friendly professors began whispering pressure, some offering thinly veiled praise, others caution. Be strategic. You've already made history. Don't burn bridges you'll need later. One senior lecturer pulled Cassian aside off campus and said, "We both know you wrote it, but Hartwick's name opens doors. This is just how the game works." Cassian stared at him. Then maybe the game needs to break. He rejected the co-authorship offer, formally, boldly. He submitted a request for an independent authorship review panel. Something rarely done, nearly impossible to push through. But the backlash was immediate. The administration called it non-standard procedure. Hartwick called it insubordination. A professor in the economics department tweeted, "Brilliance is no excuse for arrogance. A student should never undermine their mentors." And yet the story gained traction. National outlets picked it up. The Atlantic. Black prodigy versus Harvard power. When math becomes a battleground. The Washington Post. Who really owns truth in academia? BuzzFeed. This 17-year-old might have solved a math problem no one could, but Harvard wants him silent. Suddenly, Cassian's inbox was flooded. Some offered book deals. Others offered money. A tech CEO tweeted an offer to fund his future. But it all felt like spectacle. People cheering the fire but unwilling to stop the match. Still, he didn't fold. The Euler Review responded again. Due to public attention and conflict of interest, we will allow a third-party academic to serve as verification proxy if the institution fails to comply. Deadline extended 5 business days. There it was. The crack in the wall. Cassian forwarded the manuscript and metadata to Dr. Penelope Graves, the math department head at Yale, who had agreed to serve as verifier based on independent evaluation. She replied in 6 hours. "I have reviewed the full chain of authorship. I stand by my prior statement. Cassian Ward is the rightful sole author. I have submitted the confirmation to Euler directly. P. Graves." Cassian stared at the screen. No joy. Just wait. He had done it. He had crossed the line Harvard built to contain him. That night, the Euler Review sent final word. Manuscript accepted. Publication date scheduled for next quarter. Congratulations, Mr. Ward. Editorial board. Cassian sat in the quiet of Eileen's room, staring at the glowing screen. The proof that had cost him friends, safety, peace, was finally real. And yet, he didn't smile, because the war wasn't over. It was louder now. As if on cue, his Harvard email chimed. One new message. No subject. No body. Just a file. He hesitated, then opened it. A screenshot. His Harvard student dashboard, with the words "permanently flagged for ethical violation" next to his name. No explanation. No appeal. Just a digital stain. Eileen stood behind him, her voice shaking. "They're branding you. So even when you win, you wear the mark." Cassian shut the laptop. And then, just after midnight, the final blow came. A new email. Harvard header. His name bolded. Subject line, "Urgent campus security notice." Inside. "Mr. Ward, campus IT has flagged a threat directed toward your inbox." Message reads, "Publish again." And the next explosion won't be academic. Harvard PD has been notified. Please remain in a secure location. Office of Safety and Emergency Response. A bomb threat. From numbers still encrypted. Cassian didn't move. Eileen gasped. He exhaled slowly. They're trying to break me before the world hears my voice. As he looked out the window, distant sirens wailed, but not toward him. A student protest was happening at the administration building, and someone had just set it on fire. The fire at the Harvard administration building didn't start big. It began as smoke curling from a back entrance, faint, almost unnoticed. By the time security responded, the flames had already eaten through a corridor of office doors, leaving scorch marks across portraits of former deans and a row of filing cabinets still etched with the words Harvard Heritage Committee. The university moved fast to contain the narrative.
It wasn't arson, they claimed.
Just malfunctioning electrical wiring, a misfire in a centuries-old building. But everyone on campus knew the truth. The explosion wasn't in the circuitry, it was in the student body, and the system that failed to hear them. That same night, Harvard issued a Level 3 security lockdown. Buildings evacuated. All non-essential classes moved online, and students were warned against unauthorized gatherings that may inflame institutional tension. Cassian read the message from the attic of a safe-house apartment 3 towns over, a place Eileen had found through a grad student who owed her a favor. No cameras, no Wi-Fi, no traceable entries. The bomb threat against him had been real enough to trigger an internal investigation, but not real enough for Harvard to admit fault. As usual, they blamed external agitators and dangerous miscommunication. But the student body wasn't fooled. Within 48 hours, student groups across the country staged coordinated walkouts. Princeton, Yale, MIT, Columbia, Brown, hundreds of black students in hoodies and backpacks stood in silent defiance, holding up printouts of Cassian's Euler paper like protest banners. The hashtag We Are Cassian trended worldwide. Cassian, meanwhile, didn't flinch. He couldn't afford to. While the media scrambled for sound bites and Harvard huddled behind legal shields, he returned to what mattered, the kids in Roxbury. Using a burner laptop and secured VPN, he began holding nightly math sessions online. Dozens of young students logged in from cracked phones and borrowed tablets, eager to hear the voice that had shaken the ivory tower. But this time, he didn't just teach, he shared. He uploaded Solomon Vance's full original manuscript, scanned, annotated, and credited with authorship in bold. At the top, he turned the manuscript into an open-source curriculum, renaming it the Vance Method, Math as Resistance. Within a week, over 12,000 downloads. School districts in Detroit, Oakland, and Atlanta requested permission to adapt the material. Cassian granted it free. Solomon Vance watched from afar, eyes rimmed red. For the first time in decades, his name meant something again, and not in whispers. I never imagined, he said over a private call, that what they buried would become a blueprint for liberation. But as light spread, the shadows deepened. On the 4th night of lockdown, an alert came through from the Euler Review. Manuscript published. Author Cassian Ward. Institution. Independent. Co-contributors. None. Date. April 7th. It was done. His name. Alone. Permanent. Public. Cassian stared at the digital cover like it was oxygen. The comments flooded in from scholars worldwide. Elegant. Disruptive and necessary. The most important math paper of the decade. Not because of the numbers, but because of the name attached. For a brief moment, the silence that Harvard built cracked open. But peace never came. 3 hours after publication, Cassian received a certified email. Subject line: cease and desist. Sender: Law Office of Whitaker, Bell & Pro LLP, on behalf of Dr. Emil Hartwick. Mr. Ward, you are hereby notified that Dr. Hartwick has filed an official lawsuit against you for intellectual theft, academic fraud, and unauthorized publication of proprietary research. You are instructed to remove your manuscript from all public repositories and cease further commentary or dissemination. Filed in Middlesex County Superior Court. Cassian stared at the screen. It wasn't disbelief that hit him. It was exhaustion. Eileen sat beside him, reading the lines aloud. Jaw tightening. He's suing you, after everything. He's trying to rewrite the ending. Cassian murmured. Outside, protest had spread to the streets. Police stood shoulder to shoulder on campus perimeters. Drone footage showed students kneeling in silence, arms raised, signs above their heads. You can't sue the truth. But inside the safe house, the air felt heavy. This lawsuit wasn't just about the paper. It was a final act of control, a way to force Cassian back into the system he escaped. Courtrooms, legal fees, depositions, a process built to drain him of time, energy, and credibility. Eileen reached for her phone. We'll crowdsource legal support. I know journalists. We'll turn this into a bigger story. But Cassian shook his head. No. She paused. No? I'm not fighting Hartwick in his court, he said. I'm moving the court to him. And with that, he made a decision. He released a video. Just 30 seconds long. Black background. White text. I am Cassian Ward. I wrote the paper. I signed it alone. I will not be erased. You can sue the name, but not the math. CW. No face. No university logo. Just defiance. It exploded online. NPR, The Guardian, and Al Jazeera all ran special segments. Civil rights lawyers offered pro bono support. A former Supreme Court clerk called the lawsuit a last gasp of a collapsing institution. And yet Harvard remained silent. Officially, they claimed neutrality. Unofficially, internal emails leaked from a whistleblower showed university staff discussing ways to distance the administration from the unfolding media liability. Cassian was no longer their student. He was a risk management problem. But amid the chaos, something shifted. A group of Black Harvard alumni, doctors, authors, entrepreneurs, wrote an open letter condemning the lawsuit and calling for Hartwick's immediate dismissal. Over 800 signatures, full-page ad in the Boston Globe. In the final line, we were Cassian before he had a name. We stand with him now. Cassian sat in the attic with Eileen, Vance on speaker, reading the letter. His hands shook. Not from fear, but from the weight of being seen. But even in that moment, a new email arrived. Harvard's legal office. One sentence. The university has received the Hartwick suit and will be conducting an internal review into your conduct. Cassian blinked. They're not backing down. Eileen whispered. No, he said, his voice steady. They're still hoping I will. As the call ended, Cassian's phone lit up one last time. A blocked number. Voicemail received. He hit play. Vance's voice echoed. Trembling. Cassian, I just got word. They've reopened my case from 1983. But not to vindicate me, to claim you plagiarized me too. The courtroom smelled like varnished wood and cold air, a space designed to feel neutral but built on a foundation of hierarchy. It wasn't just the judge's bench towering above them, or the crest of the state seal carved behind his head. It was the way everyone looked at Cassian the moment he walked in. Not as a scholar, as a defendant. The trial had drawn national attention. Dozens of press outlets waited outside. The gallery seats were filled with journalists, activists and Harvard officials watching from behind their tinted glasses. No one dared speak too loudly. No one dared blink too slowly. Cassian Ward, 17 years old, stood at the center of it all, accused not of violence, not of fraud in the traditional sense, but of the quietest, most insidious charge of all, plagiarizing his own brilliance. Hartwick sat across from him, shoulders rigid, hands folded calmly, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. Next to him, his attorney's three partners from Whitaker, Bell and Pro, one of Boston's most ruthless law firms. The case on paper was about authorship, but in reality, it was about ownership. The prosecution wasted no time. Their opening argument was sharp, practiced and dripping with polite venom. They claimed Cassian had exploited access to university materials, misappropriated departmental drafts, and intentionally omitted faculty contributions in an attempt to publish the Euler proof. They used phrases like an alarming academic shortcut and a pattern of deliberate concealment. But their most damning move came early. They presented a digital timeline, a manipulated record showing that Hartwick had typed a version of the theorem months before Cassian's email chain began. A technical fabrication, likely constructed by IT insiders, but it looked official, real, convincing. Then they brought out the testimonies. A retired professor who vaguely recalled Cassian showing early arrogance. A former TA who stated that Cassian often failed to cite collaborative discussions. Even an administrator who hinted that a mentorship breakdown likely led to confusion about research boundaries. It was all coded racism, weaponized respectability. Nothing about the proof itself. Everything about Cassian's tone, his background, his demeanor. They even questioned his scholarship origin, reading aloud from his high school file. Attended an under-resourced public school. Little evidence of formal mathematical training prior to freshman year. as if that disqualified genius. When Cassian finally took the stand, he wasn't asked about his logic, his formulas, or his process. They asked about his mother, about whether his father was active in his life, about how many books were in his house growing up. They made him repeat, 3 separate times, that he didn't attend a math Olympiad in high school. "You expect this court," the lead prosecutor sneered, "to believe that a first-year student from Southside Chicago independently formulated a theory that world-class academics have spent decades failing to solve." Cassian replied simply, "Yes." The courtroom buzzed. The judge banged his gavel. Eileen testified next. She came with receipts, literal ones. Time-stamped documents showing Cassian's process. Notebooks, drafts, library entry logs, even meal card swipes that proved when and where he worked. But her words went deeper than paper. "I watched him build it from nothing," she said. "I watched him hide it when he was afraid. I watched him choose truth over safety. He didn't steal this work. He protected it." Then came Solomon Vance. The entire courtroom fell silent as the man who had been erased stood up and stated his name. He described Hartwick. He described how the original version of the conundrum, his version, was discredited, then repackaged years later by the man now suing Cassian. "This isn't the first time Dr. Hartwick has taken from a black mind," he said. "It's just the first time the world didn't look away." The judge asked, "Mr. Vance, do you have proof that Dr. Hartwick used your work without credit?" Vance held up a page, aged yellowing, with handwritten margins matching Hartwick's early publications almost word for word. "Yes," he said. "And now, so do you." Still, the tide remained uncertain. Even with emotion, even with truth. Because truth, in courts like these, often bowed to pedigree. As closing arguments approached, Cassian felt the walls tightening. The lead prosecutor stood with all the calm of a surgeon. "Innovation," he said, "is not the same as ownership. Mr. Ward may have written something bold, but that doesn't mean he did it alone. This case is not about race, it's about rules, and those rules protect everyone, even against promising students who take too much credit too soon." He turned to the jury. "Don't let sympathy blind objectivity." Cassian felt the sting of those words crawl under his skin. Then the defense stood. His pro bono attorney, a quiet, fierce black woman named Adrienne Chase, walked slowly to the center of the room. "This isn't about one proof," she said. "This is about centuries of stolen brilliance. Black scholars who were told their thoughts were only valid when filtered through a white voice." She held up the Euler Review. "This is not about Hartwick's pride. It's about a system that collapses every time a black mind refuses to be filtered." But just before the judge called for closing statements, a voice called out from the back, "Your Honor, permission to speak?" All eyes turned. A man stood in the gallery, mid-30s, nervous but determined. The judge frowned. "State your name." "David Bellamy, former TA under Dr. Hartwick." Cassian's heart stopped. The man stepped forward, holding a flash drive. "I have audio of Dr. Hartwick admitting to taking credit for a black student's research. I recorded it during an office conversation. I was afraid to release it, but I can't stay quiet anymore." The courtroom erupted. Hartwick's face twisted. The judge called recess immediately. Cassian sat frozen as Eileen grabbed his arm. "This is it," she whispered. As the judge ordered the evidence to be played behind closed doors, a clerk whispered in the judge's ear, and suddenly, the court doors were locked. The audio contains references to other tenured faculty. This case just became bigger than Hartwick. The courtroom doors locked with a soft mechanical click, but the sound hit like thunder. Everyone inside froze. No one was expecting a security lockdown, not during closing argument, not when the case had seemingly neared its end. Judge Halverson adjusted his glasses, his face unreadable, as the bailiff leaned in and whispered something else. A moment passed. Then the judge turned to the room. "This court will proceed in chambers," he said. "Only the involved legal teams, the defendants and Mr. Bellamy may remain." Journalists were escorted out. Spectators followed, confused and buzzing with questions. As Eileen packed up her notes beside Cassian, her eyes narrowed. "This isn't just about Hartwick anymore," she whispered. "They're circling the wagons." Within minutes, the room had emptied to a skeleton crew of silence and tension. The judge ordered the flash drive submitted by David Bellamy, the former TA, to be played aloud. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the audio file began. The voice was unmistakable. Hartwick.
Laughing.
"It's not theft if no one remembers their names. You'd be amazed how many students give up their ideas just to get through the program, especially the black ones. They think they're being mentored. Another voice, softer, likely Bellamy's, replied, "That you didn't cite him. That's fraud, Emile. It's policy. I shape the work. They're the noise. Do you think this place would have published that kind of theory under a kid from Baton Rouge? Please." Gasps filled the air. The audio continued. Snippets from other conversations. Mentions of redirecting funding from underperforming students, making sure problematic voices don't publish, and sanitizing tone to match department standards. Then came the name, Solomon Vance. Hartwick mentioned him offhandedly, joking about how that paper almost ended my tenure until we filed him under misconduct. The tape ended in a long, pulsing silence. The judge's face had gone pale. For a moment, no one moved. Then he spoke slowly. "This is no longer a civil dispute over authorship. This is the beginning of a federal academic ethics investigation." Hartwick didn't speak. He couldn't. His face was frozen, the arrogance drained. His legal team huddled, whispering furiously. The judge turned to Cassian. "Mr. Ward, the court recognizes the submission of your proof as independently authored. The suit filed against you is dismissed with prejudice." He paused, then added something rarely heard in court. "You're free, and so is your name." Cassian didn't blink. He sat still, like the verdict had to echo through generations before reaching him. It had taken everything, not just logic, not just evidence, but exposure of the rot, so deep the institution had pretended it didn't exist. Outside, word spread instantly. Protesters wept. Reporters scrambled for quotes. Across social media, the news broke like a dam. Hartwick disgraced. Cassian vindicated. Harvard under review. Eileen gripped his hand as they exited the courtroom. The sun had broken through the clouds above the courthouse steps, but Cassian barely noticed. The crowd parted like water as he walked forward. His hoodie pulled up, face unreadable. The weight of survival still clung to him. Victory didn't feel like joy. It felt like a bruise healing too slow. In the days that followed, things moved quickly. But with Harvard's signature gloss, the administration released a polished statement. "We deeply regret the structural oversights that enabled misconduct within our academic departments. Harvard remains committed to upholding justice, inclusivity, and academic excellence." Then came the offer, delivered by courier, in a thick envelope, sealed with the Harvard crest. Inside, an official letter of apology, a revocation of the gag order, an honorary doctorate in mathematical philosophy. Backdated to the semester Cassian had been placed under review, an open invitation to return to Harvard as a guest lecturer for a new initiative on ethics in STEM. And finally, a settlement check, 7 figures, non-disclosure agreement attached. Cassian read every word, then placed it on the table and walked away. He didn't want their apology, not wrapped in ceremony, not papered in PR. Solomon Vance called him that evening. "You won," Vance said softly, "more than I ever did." Cassian exhaled. "I didn't win. I survived." "But survival," Vance replied, "is the most radical form of defiance." There was a long pause. Then Cassian asked, "What happens now?" Vance laughed gently. "Now? You decide what kind of legacy they don't get to write." Cassian looked out the window at the quiet city skyline. He still hadn't opened the envelope again. He still hadn't answered the university. Because part of him knew, the moment he responded, they'd start the next story. The redemption arc. The institution learning from its mistakes. Cassian returned to his desk that night and found a hand-delivered letter tucked under the door. No return name, just one line written in bold black ink. "We cleaned up Hartwick, but the department's still ours. Try to teach here, and you'll be erased for real this time." The letter with the veiled threat sat unopened for 2 days on Cassian's desk, its ink still bold, its message still heavy. "Try to teach here, and you'll be erased for real this time." He didn't reply. He didn't flinch. He didn't call the police. Instead, he pulled out a new notebook, the same kind he'd used to piece together the conundrum. Wide-ruled, unbranded, untraceable. And on the first page, he wrote in block letters, "Vance Word Instasty." The name wasn't for show. It was a reckoning, stitched together from 2 generations of silenced brilliance. Solomon Vance's lost work. Cassian Ward's stolen credit. One buried. One nearly broken. But both still breathing. Within a month, the concept evolved into a real thing. Cassian, Eileen, and a handful of rogue educators designed a platform from scratch, one not backed by universities or grant boards, but by black coders, freelance archivists, and volunteers who had watched the system from inside and walked away. The Vance Ward Institute launched on a single domain, mathunberry.org. Its mission: democratize mathematical education. Its method: center the voices that academia had spent centuries ignoring. Its fuel: the fire of those who'd been told you don't belong, and chose to solve anyway. Cassian didn't brand it with his face. He didn't attach his bio. There were no logos, no glossy marketing campaigns, just real, accessible math from number theory to statistical modeling, with lesson modules written in both English and plain code, designed to teach both logic and literacy. Within weeks, the site exploded. First 1,000 downloads. Then, by the third month, 1 million. Emails flooded in, from Baltimore, South Africa, New Delhi, and Compton. Students who had never seen themselves in a math textbook now saw themselves in a proof, in a lesson, in a paragraph that didn't use colonial models as neutral examples. The Vance Ward method became a movement. Schools that had once relied on state-funded curriculums quietly added the modules to after-school programs. Teachers, burned out and boxed in by standardized testing, used the platform to re-engage students, especially students of color. But the most powerful shift came from the students themselves. One girl from Memphis messaged anonymously, "I used to think math was a mirror I'd never fit into. You made it a window." Cassian read that line in silence, then closed the laptop. He never sought attention. So when Hollywood called, 3 studios offering biopic rights, he declined them all. When TED sent an invitation, prime slot, global broadcast, he sent back a single line, "Let someone else speak." And when Harvard requested a follow-up interview to close the loop, he didn't respond. He was done with closure. He wanted openings. Solomon Vance continued to mentor from afar. Still off-grid, still moving carefully. But he sent new equations, new ideas, and a monthly handwritten letter that always ended with the same line. "They built the tower, but we built the map." Eileen took a faculty role at a smaller university, one that let her teach ethics without handcuffs. She helped design curriculum policies, modeled after the Vance Ward framework. She and Cassian spoke less, but when they did, it was quiet, loyal, and never for the public. Cassian's name never faded, but it changed. He became less a person, and more a symbol. The kid who solved the impossible. The student who said no to Harvard's apology. The proof that math wasn't colorblind, it was color-coded. Investigations bloomed across academia. A dozen professors across 5 universities were flagged for ethics violations. Multiple students came forward with eerily similar stories of idea theft, silencing, and forced co-authorship. One Ivy League school implemented a new policy. Students could now request independent authorship boards before submitting joint research. Another began funding student-led investigations into historical academic plagiarism. And across it all, Cassian remained in the background. Not hidden, just not performing. He believed the movement only worked if it didn't orbit him. So when news broke that he'd turned down a $2.8 million contract from a Silicon Valley think tank, the internet erupted again. But he never explained. Instead, he posted one update to Mathunberry. "What we build matters more than what we're offered. We are not decoration. We are direction." CW. Years passed, and then one morning, a formal letter arrived in a red envelope, hand-delivered, Harvard's seal on the top corner. Cassian opened it slowly. "Mr. Ward, it is with deep respect and institutional recognition that we formally invite you to return to Harvard. Not as a student, but as a visiting professor. We are launching a new interdisciplinary program, Math, Memory, and Power. Your leadership would be foundational, your presence, transformational. We acknowledge the pain we caused. We hope to create space not for redemption, but for redefinition. Respectfully, Dean Ravel, Office of Institutional Reconciliation." He read the letter twice. Then a third time. He sat with it. It wasn't what he expected, and it wasn't what he trusted. But it was more than a headline. It was a door, and he was no longer the same student who had once waited for permission to knock. Cassian folded the letter and looked out at the city skyline, when his phone buzzed with a new email from an unknown address. The subject line read, "Guess who's back on faculty review, and guess which department tried to reinstate him." The email that warned him someone was trying to reinstate Hartwick still sat unread in his inbox. The morning Cassian stepped onto Harvard's campus again. He didn't need to open it. He already knew the truth. Systems rarely change because they want to. They change because someone refuses to stop pushing. The air in Cambridge was colder than he remembered. Or maybe he was different now. Sharper, steadier, tempered by the fire he never asked to walk through. The plain black suit he wore wasn't meant to impress. It was armor. It made him invisible where it mattered and undeniable where it counted. As he walked across Harvard Yard, students paused mid-conversation. Some whispered. Some stared. Some stepped aside with the quiet reverence usually reserved for monuments or storms. A few lifted their phones, unsure whether photographing him was homage or intrusion. He kept walking. Aileen met him outside the science center. Older now, more tired but unmistakably the same person who had once shoved a folder of forgotten brilliance into his hands and demanded the world face what it had erased. "You ready?" she asked. "Ready isn't the word," he replied.
What is?
"Necessary." She nodded. They tried to cancel the lecture twice, but the moment the guest list leaked, the donors wouldn't let them. He raised an eyebrow. "Donors? Turns out they like a redemption story," she said. "Even if it's not Harvard's." They entered the building together. The auditorium was overflowing. Students lining the walls, alumni packed shoulder to shoulder, reporters swarming the aisles. Security guards stood like bookends near the entrances. Faculty members filled the front row. None of them smiled. They weren't here for him. They were here because they couldn't afford not to be. A hush washed over the room the moment Cassian stepped onto the stage. No introductions. No ceremonial fanfare. Just silence. Full, heavy, weight. He walked to the chalkboard, picked up a single stick of chalk, and felt its weight. Chalk had always been the purest language he knew. No screens to hack. No systems to manipulate. Just hand to surface. Mind to movement. He drew the first line. Not from the conundrum. Not from the Euler paper. This was something new. Something built from the bones of Vance's original theorem, but expanded into a shape that bore both of their names. A sequence that folded history into logic. A proof that exposed how patterns weren't neutral. How erasure left fingerprints in the numbers themselves. He wrote slowly, not for effect, but for clarity. Each symbol was a resurrection. Each variable, a reclamation. When he stepped back, the board was full, elegant, sprawling, alive, a structure that refused to be simplified into a plot. He turned to the room. "This," Cassian said, his voice steady, "is the equation they told me I couldn't see. The kind they said wasn't meant for someone like me. But math doesn't belong to gatekeepers. It belongs to the minds that can hear it." Faculty members shifted uncomfortably. He didn't look at them. He continued. "This sequence is dedicated to Solomon Vance, and to every student who wrote brilliance in the margins of a system that never credited them. To every black kid told they were too loud, too quiet, too ambitious, too presumptuous, too anything to stand at this board." A murmur moved through the crowd. Not disagreement, recognition. He raised the chalk again. "When I solved the conundrum, I thought I was proving something to Harvard. But I was wrong. I was proving something to myself. That silence isn't humility. Silence is survival. And survival," he paused, "is not enough." The room remained still. No one coughed. No one shifted. It felt as if the entire auditorium inhaled as one. Cassian continued. "I am not here because Harvard changed. I am here because I did. And because movements don't need permission. They need persistence." He set the chalk down. Then he did something he'd never been allowed to do in any classroom he'd ever sat in. He raised his hand. The gesture was simple, almost quiet, but it carried a weight older than the campus itself. A black mathematician raising his hand in Harvard's grand auditorium was not an invitation. It was a declaration. For the first time, the room responded in kind. Hands shot up across the auditorium, students eager to ask, to understand, to challenge not just the math, but the world that had tried to contain it. Cassian pointed to the back, where a young girl stood, maybe 16, maybe 17. Her notebook clutched to her chest. She had dark braids, square glasses, and an expression cracked open by curiosity rather than fear. She swallowed once before speaking. "Professor Ward," she said carefully, respectfully, as if the title might shatter. "I've been studying the recursive structure you built on top of Vance's original framework. The collapse sequence makes sense." But the room leaned closer. She lifted her notebook. If the prime synchronization is as elegant as you say, shouldn't the second half of the proof be unstable? Cassian blinked. Not because she was wrong, but because she was the first person ever to see the flaw. He stepped toward the board slowly, reading through the symbols he'd written. He replayed the logic in his head. The structure, the inversion, the cascade. She was right. Not completely, but profoundly. A tiny instability lay buried inside the recursion. A hairline crack invisible to nearly everyone. Nearly. Cassian turned back toward her. What's your name? He asked. Nevia Brooks. She said, voice steady. Where are you studying? Nowhere yet, she replied. I applied here last fall. Waitlisted. Of course she was. He nodded slowly, thoughtfully. The room waited for his response. Nevia stood perfectly still, notebook pressed to her ribs like a shield she wasn't sure she was allowed to use. Cassian gave a small, deliberate smile. You're not wrong, he said. The instability is real. And if you're willing, we can explore it together. A ripple of shock spread through the auditorium. Cassian Ward, Harvard's most controversial, most brilliant, most silenced mathematician, had just acknowledged a student's insight publicly, respectfully and without ego. The world had finally listened to him, and now he was listening back. Nevia exhaled, shoulders shaking just once before she steadied herself. I'd like that. Cassian turned to the room, voice rising. This is what truth looks like. Not prestige, not pedigree, not titles, just minds meeting where the math lives. The auditorium erupted, applause exploding like a wave. Students rising to their feet, faculty forced into reluctant recognition. Cassian didn't bow. He just stepped back from the board, watching the equation glow under the warm lights. Not an ending, a beginning. As the applause died down, a dean hurried down the aisle toward Cassian, face pale, voice urgent. He whispered something in Cassian's ear that made his expression change instantly. Nevia's question wasn't the only discovery today. Someone just accessed the archive and uploaded the original 1983 version of Vance's Forbidden Theorem to every Harvard server. If you've ever been overlooked, silenced or told you didn't belong, Cassian's story was written for you. For every truth buried and every voice erased. It's time we stop asking for permission to be heard. Type yes if you believe brilliance has no color. Subscribe if this broke your heart.